I get why people feel the need to smell the witness, okay? To be in the room that you can, see the sweat, glistening on their forehead. But come on, you're taking a deposition of, one of 50 witnesses in a case, and this guy's not particularly relevant. Do you really have to take a flight to Little Rock and then a 4-hour drive to some court reporter's office in the middle of, Western Arkansas to take this person's 2-hour deposition? Or maybe you can do it over video, save your client $5,000, and get the testimony that you need to actually move forward with your case.
Lawsome, the podcast for law firms. Powered by ConsultWebs.
Welcome back to Lawsome, the only podcast for lawyers that longs for pants. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain the legal community on the latest in legal marketing and law firm development. I am your host, Jake Sanders. He is your host, Paul Julius. And when it comes to innovation, we're right on the edge.
Yep, absolutely. This podcast was remote before anybody else was.
We transferred it from an old VCR.
Yeah, man.
So we did a lot of reverse engineering to get this podcast live to you, delivered via fax through your favorite podcast app. It's just innovation, guys. Sorry.
Cutting edge. Yeah.
Sorry.
Every time.
Sorry, not sorry. Yeah, works every time.
Right.
Let's tell people what's on the show today.
On the show today, we're talking about fraud, judicial reform, reimagining law firm management of the future. Just a casual conversation like usual around here. First, an article from the Law 21 blog. And then joining in and further elevating the conversation is Etan Mark, Migdal, and Hayden. And of course, we find out what makes our guest tick with 5 questions we ask everyone.
Pull up a plate. It's the Hot Takes Buffet.
The article today is from the Law 21 blog by Jordan Furlong, who is a leading analyst of the global legal market and forecaster of its future development. He has an amazing series as of the recording date today, which is April 9th, that he's updated very consistently since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. But it's this series where he's he's outlining the problems that the legal system is facing, what the justice system particularly is up against. And then in this article that we're sharing today, which is Justice Reconstructed, he's talking about legal reform and how to get there. And our guest, Etan Mark, has been sort of pushing towards this reimagining of the legal process. And now with COVID, it seems like we're weeks into this, and already e-signing is becoming more, available. Law firms are switching to remote. They're doing, video depositions. Judges are getting on Zoom. So everybody's switching really fast. And, when Etan has been talking about this for years, Jordan Furlong has been talking about this for years, and nothing has happened. And in a span of a few weeks, things have really drastically changed. So I'll start with this little bit, the beginning of Jordan's piece, and then we can provide hot takes. But he said he ended the previous post in his series by contending that while we need to do what we can to keep the old justice system in one piece for as long as we can, our primary goal should be to build new, safer, better quarters for our justice institutions and move everyone there after the crisis. So how do we begin that process? Where is that safer location, and how do we get there? He zeroed in on 3 things, which was study the successful triages. A lot of law firms and legal professionals are creating rent letter generators or some immigration support for documents that you need. Here's this, template. So they're providing a lot of help and legal aid in that way. So he's mentioning study the successful ones that are helping address the COVID problems, then design for people, and then create an online legal consumer hub. So those were his 3 pieces. Of course, he is brilliant in the way he explains it. My hot take is that I love this and I'm thankful for it, but I don't know if that's really a take. I'm just like, okay, you can pass through. But what's your thought here, Paul? I mean,
I feel like you, that this is well written. It's very aspirational. But the thing is, we've been hearing people say this same stuff for almost 3 years we've been doing this show now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, it took this kind of, global health crisis to bring about, I think, what would be considered kind of table stakes at just about any other business or industry.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't know how much of this is going to stick around.
Real, yeah.
That's just my honest feeling. I mean, so it's for as many firms as we've seen who've been, posting pictures of themselves in a Zoom conference and stuff like that.
Right.
We've heard the flip side of it too, like, oh man, the senior partners aren't willing to join these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand why we even, like we talked to Etan later, they don't even understand why we need to upgrade our case management system or anything. So, while I do see a little progress, I don't necessarily believe that this is like a watershed moment and a new birth into technology for the law firms.
I know. Well, and
justice system.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, and Jordan is, no one is more skeptimistic. If that's a thing, than Jordan. I mean, he really is like, he's been banging this drum for a long time, but he has this client-centered, people-centered, marketplace-centered ideology around the way the reforms should be. And I think really what we're seeing recently is, like it or lump it, everything is going towards this. There is this kind of gravitational pull towards ease of use because I can't physically be in the same space as you, because this is we had to have a barrier put up for us to free ourselves and allow ourselves to see us using these things that could connect us. I just needed to see, and as we were talking about Etan, and also last week's episode with Eric Farber about culture. I want to be in the same room with you. I want to see you. I want to, now you can't. So instantly there's a barrier, and we had to have that to overcome, because before the cost for change was meh, but now the cost for change is disappearing. But I hear you. Are we going to go back? Is this going to stick around? But if you're saying that I can e-sign this document and not have to go to court or not have to spend all that time, maybe that's where that'll go, because the overhead will show me the way. Rather than saying I need this, you say, well, we can't afford it. I don't know. I think there's a lot of whole interesting things that will force people to change, because when you're broke, you'll quickly invent things,
like I say, I am all for what he's saying in here, but the other, I don't want to say realist or maybe just more pessimist. I mean, we've had people on who do legal procurement. I mean, we've had lots of different, management types of, SaaS services for streamlining. It just doesn't get adopted on an industry scale. It just doesn't. I mean, I don't see court being available by Zoom once everybody's got the okay to go back to work. I just have a hard time seeing that. Everything you said though, e-signing, yeah. Like Etan says later, do we really need a notary? In person.
Yeah. Do I need to be in person in this deposition? Yeah. Right.
Right. So stuff like that, I think, maybe that's where these strides start to be made. But the flip side of it too is it has to be, dictated by what the consumers want, and I'd be really interested to see how people feel about it, because we know that 80% of the people
want
70% of people want to discuss the details of their case in person.
Yeah.
So, is all of this going to shift that? Like, is in person going to be okay video face to face? Or
yeah, I hear you, man. Yeah. So a lot of good questions brought to the table by Jordan, who is amazing, who continues to write this amazing series on his law blog, Law 21. You got to check it out.
Yeah.
We'll go to the interview with Etan, and I'll end with a line from Jordan. He says that we need to buy time for the justice system to stagger through the crisis as best it can. But before it's all over, we need to ensure that the construction of new institutions and the evacuation of people from the old ones is at least well underway. We need a new justice system. We've known that for a long time. We need to make this new one fit for the century we live in, not the century that ended 20 years ago, or, more accurately, 3 weeks ago.
Lawson continues. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Since 1999, ConsultWebs has been helping law firms connect with clients on the web, connect digital marketing success with firm success, and connect their business goals to proven strategies that help them get the most out of their legal marketing. Go to consultwebs.com to learn more.
And now, a Lawsome interview.
Etan Mark is an attorney at Mark, Migdal, and Hayden. Began his legal career working as a business and securities litigator at a top 10 American lawyer big law firm in New York. Since leaving New York for higher sea levels, Etan became a devotee of the value proposition sometimes offered by not big law: efficiency, service, and quality. He's been a clerk, a CEO, a shark, and now an esteemed guest of the Lawson podcast. Etan, welcome aboard.
Thank you. It's good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
So give us a brief rundown of your trajectory up until now. Litigation, a little bit of entrepreneurship, slang and law, busting fraudsters. It seems like you've done a whole bunch of stuff. Just sort of give us your elevator pitch.
Sure. I started my career at one of the big law firms in New York, coming out of a law school in Washington, D.C. And I did securities litigation for a couple of years, billing clients at several $100s an hour, basically for document review. Didn't really get a ton of fulfillment out of that work. It's not really what they teach you about in law school. And I realized as I was doing it, this is stupid. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me that clients were paying all that money for that kind of work. It seemed like there had to be a better way, but I had not nearly enough experience to understand what that other way could be. I met my wife in New York. We moved down to Miami, where she's from, and I began a clerkship for a federal judge down here, which was obviously an awesome experience to see the courthouse firsthand, to develop these relationships with judges and the lawyers and the legal community and the Miami legal community in particular, which I love. And it got me thinking. It was around that same time that Thomas Friedman came out with the World is Flat book, which, globalization and all that other good stuff. And I immediately started thinking that we got to figure out a way to outsource legal work to other parts of the world, for lack of a better word. That's what the idea was behind my first company. I was a little bit early on it, I think, and we had a bunch of lawyers in India doing what I'll call lower and higher volume document review for clients and attorneys in the United States. Did that for a couple of years, and ultimately couldn't really make enough money doing it and wasn't really getting the traction. I think there's a whole bunch of reasons that could be a whole nother podcast as to why that didn't work. And I went to go work for a mid-sized regional law firm in Florida. I was there for 9 years, focusing in on complex commercial litigation with a focus on fraud. Anytime I say I have a focus on fraud, it makes me uncomfortable. But litigating fraud cases,
right?
And I did that for 9 years. had a good experience, learned a ton, learned a lot about the practice of law, and then finally started my current law firm, Migdal and Hayden, 3 years ago. Again, kind of continuously striving to do things a little bit differently, and hopefully in a way that resonates a bit more with the needs of clients.
So diving into the fraud thing.
Sure.
When you're saying you're a certified fraud examiner, can you just speak to that and what was your focus? And then in this time of COVID, like what does fraud look like and where are you kind of seeing hotspots?
Sure. Well, Florida also is uniquely positioned in some ways as being the central hub of fraud in this country. Sunny place for shady people, as the saying goes down here, and it's going to be bad for the COVID response is going to be brutal, and the underlying problem is that obviously our federal government doesn't seem to know what the heck it's doing, and that's just my opinion. And as a result of that, it's kind of chaotic. I mean, even just getting people who were out there trying to get loans last week, it was just an absolute cluster. It really was. Now, the COVID experience is unique in a lot of ways because most of the bad frauds that we know about historically in this country are affinity fraud. They're frauds that are targeted towards a particular demographic where somebody's got some kind of an in with that group and is sort of pushing the fraud within that group because you've already crossed the initial threshold, which is trust in a lot of these cases, right? I mean, you think of Bernie Madoff as an example. There was a group of people that Bernie Madoff was able to target and that were really the prime victims of his fraud. Down here, there was another guy named Scott Rothstein that ran a law firm that ended up being a huge fraud. And it's the same kind of thing. And usually what you'll see is there's these pockets, right? The Haitian community gets targeted with one particular kind of fraud. The Jewish community gets targeted with another kind of fraud. The COVID experience is so universal. Everybody is going to be a potential target of fraud relating to COVID. Now, what is that fraud going to look like? Unfortunately, the people, if there's one thing fraudsters are, they're committed, right? And they spend a whole bunch of time trying to figure out ways to screw you over. I don't know yet what that fraud is going to look like, but whatever those safeguards are that you wanted to put in effect and that you've been thinking about putting into effect, well, it's time to put them into effect, right? So for law firms, don't send your wire instructions over email in an unprotected document. It's just one of those things, especially smaller firms. I see them do it all the time. Just make the document password protected. Send it under a separate email, things like that. Check your sent mailbox to make sure that somebody hasn't hacked into your email account and isn't sending emails from your account. There's some sort of basic steps, and obviously there's the phishing scams that are going to be very, very prevalent. And unfortunately, what's going to end up happening is that the victims are going to be, as usual, the less technologically savvy people, the people who are typically an older demographic. It's one of the reasons Florida gets tagged a lot, and also often an immigrant demographic. People who perhaps English isn't their native language, and they get sucked into fraud more than others. So be vigilant, be smart. That's really, unfortunately, the best advice I can give at this time.
And you're not the first person to say that too, particularly about the wire information, also phishing. And, this one, these government stimulus, checks or deposits or whatever seem really ripe for it because they're like, hey, if you have a social security number and you e-filed, it's good. We'll take care of you. Well, how many emails are going to go out now that are like, hey, just verify your information? Like, the IRS doesn't do that,
Oh, well, and then also what I've been seeing recently is like a push towards cash apps. Like, if we could just have this certain app, download this app. There's whole groups on Twitter where they're just like, download this, I'll give you free $25 credit, on this, whatever this is. And, someone's saying, well, I need to transfer money fast and I might not have access to a bank.
Yep.
It's a really weird time, to know like who to trust.
Yeah, and these, last week, can you just imagine how many people were emailing their social security numbers around just to get this PPP loan, right? So
Yep.
this PPP loan hit, late last week, and it was a mad rush every banker was being contacted. I mean, it was an absolute cluster. The amount of people in this country that just completely threw out the window temporarily any kind of basic protection measures and emailed their social security number, their EIN, their payroll numbers, their ownership numbers. It's going to be scary to see what happens over the next several months for a lot of reasons, but that's one.
I agree. So,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about lawyers on the show, as we just were, but we never really talk about judges, and that's actually on my bucket list. I want to have a judge on the show. We haven't yet. So if you know anybody, hook me up. But anyway, a lot of your work focuses on reforms and action at the judiciary level, and so why? What drew you to that?
It's hard to say what drew me to it. I worked for a judge for a year, loved it, and when I was done with that clerkship on the federal level, I went into a state court in Florida for the first time ever after having been a lawyer for a few years. And I had never walked into a state courthouse before. And it was incredible to see what a disorganized fiasco it was. I truly couldn't believe it. And you get to thinking, how do I explain this to my clients? How do I explain to my clients what actually happens in a courthouse? And you get to thinking, we talk so much about things like access to justice, right? And it's so important, right? But and we talk so much about providing efficiency and value to our clients, and what can we do to maximize efficiency, and how could we really put the processes in place and the technology in place and the culture in place to make the consumer client experience as positive as possible. And all of that kind of goes out the window when you go to a courthouse, a state courthouse, where most of our justice is meted out, right? The vast majority of it is happening in state courthouses, not federal courthouses. You go in front of a judge that's making $160,000 a year. They have 3,000 to 4,000 active cases, civil cases. They get tons of filings every single day. You have a 5-minute motion calendar hearing. There's about 200 pages of briefing that has been submitted in support of whatever motion it is that's in front of this judge. And there's about 100 lawyers in the courtroom, all waiting for their turn on a motion calendar hearing in Miami-Dade County. So what does that mean from a practical standpoint? Number one, it means that you probably spent a lot more time and you probably charged your client a lot more than you should have for whatever it is that you wrote and put in front of this judge. That's number one, because odds are that the judge did not carefully read what you provided him or her, and certainly didn't really read it. At best, maybe skimmed it, right? So no, that's point number one on that. And point number two is that you just sat in a courtroom for 2.5 hours watching all these other people argue so that you can provide your 35-second presentation on an unopposed motion for enlargement of time. So when you're dealing with these judges and when you're dealing in sort of that environment, you think to yourself, why have we set these judges up for such failure? And how does that translate, again, to kind of going back to the clients? So I think one of the reasons I care so much about the judges is because they're ultimately the gatekeepers, right? I mean, they're the ones who you're relying on to provide good, effective, and efficient justice. And if we don't provide them with the tools to do that, then it's going to be much harder thing to get done.
So, I mean, I guess then what would you like? What do you think? What would be the number one thing you'd like to see changed, or what are some things that you're pushing for that you think could be realistically implemented that would have a real impact?
Yeah, I mean and it's hard because it feels somewhat insurmountable. So different states have different things going on. Florida, like most states, Florida elects its state court judges. Most states have elected judges. Some are appointed, and obviously the consequences of having elected versus appointed judges are there doesn't seem to be a perfect solution, right? You've got significant political considerations that have to be dealt with and addressed under either set of circumstances. Um, funding is a huge thing. Funding is a huge problem. There's no reason, in my view, that a state court judge with 3,500 cases should be making $160,000 a year. I just don't. I don't get that. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They should have clerks. I mean, judges should have clerks that are able to help them with their caseload. Those are sort of two, I think, pretty simple solutions to help mitigate some of this. Judges in South Florida, in my opinion, should be paid more than judges in North Florida. Not because North Florida isn't a fantastic place. It's that the workload for a South Florida judge is just a 10x of the workload of a judge in Northern Florida. And these are things that that the legislature has to take up and deal with. And I think the only way that they're going to take it up and deal with it is if businesses and business owners start turning the screws a little bit on these things.
So, and here's the thing, you turn of the screw. COVID shut down, a courthouse. And now all of a sudden they're letting e-signatures pop up. I don't know if you saw Bob Ambrogi, but all of a sudden, they're making moves to sort of swiftly make e-signature an option, or, telecommuting, telehealth, telelaw.
Yep.
What are your thoughts here, and sort of how are you seeing that disrupt things? I mean, because everyone couldn't do it until all of a sudden there was no choice,
Yep. And a lot of us have been sort of banging the drum on that for a long time, right? And again, necessity is the mother of invention, I guess, right?
Right.
So remote notaries is another thing. I mean, the whole concept of having to be in the same room as somebody to notarize something, it's just like, come on, man. Why? It's ridiculous, I mean, videotape depositions is another, right? Now, again, I get why people feel the need to smell the witness, okay? To be in the room that you can, see the sweat, glistening on their forehead. But come on, you're taking a deposition of, one of 50 witnesses in a case, and this guy's not particularly relevant. Do you really have to take a flight to Little Rock and then a 4-hour drive to some court reporter's office in the middle of, Western Arkansas to take this person's 2-hour deposition? Or maybe you can do it over video, save your client $5,000 and get the testimony that you need to actually move forward with your case. So I talk to my team about this all the time. How really is this going to change the practice of law? Because remote working, I think, right, the ability for people to work remotely, all of a sudden, I think lawyers are going to become a lot more comfortable with that, right? I think just all of a sudden, everybody's remote working. I think people are going to be anxious to get back to the office when we can get back to the office. But I also think that it's going to be a lot easier for folks to say to their colleagues, hey, I'm working from home today. And people aren't going to be looking at them cockeyed, say, oh, yeah, sure, you're working from home today, So I do think that there's going to be some really interesting long-term effects of this. The Zoom call thing is kind of insane. I was joking around with somebody the other day about how now it seems like we're doing Zoom calls for things that normally you would just do an audio telephone call for. So it's kind of going the other way too, right? I don't need to look at people all the time. I'm very happy to just be on sometimes.
Totally.
My man.
Yeah.
Could we not handle this by email, people? Come on.
Well, it's like when people it's like when they videotape their podcast, but they're just talking, and you're like, I'm just seeing you talk, and I don't know if that's amazing.
Right. Like, I don't need to, put on a clean shirt for this telephone call,
Right.
So
interesting.
So it kind of goes both ways, but I'll be super interested to see how this plays out, and I think it's also a really good subject for one of your future podcasts to see really how are people who are much smarter than I am thinking about the trends in how truly the practice of law is going to be changing, and really, I mean, think about the big law firms, right? I'd be really interested to see how, big law, which typically is a little bit reluctant to allow people to work from home, or at least, consistently work from home. How are they going to be adapting? How is office space going to be adapting? I mean, all of a sudden now, do you really need, if you've got a 20 lawyer law firm, do you really need 20 lawyer offices? Now, that's something that law firms have kind of been nibbling around the edges about for the past few years, but it seems like they're going to be a lot more comfortable pulling the trigger on some of these changes now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so you're talking about the future, and you're thinking about securing some kind of placehold for lawyers, and it seems like it's changing a lot. You might not be a brick and mortar law firm. You could be a distributed workforce. What's your advice for the lawyer listening to this show? I mean, like, this one piece of advice here, is it to maybe push for judicial reforms? I mean, is there a way that lawyers could help in that regard, or what's your advice for, future proofing, a bit of a legal career here in uncertain times?
Yeah, well, so let me first answer the judge part of the question, and then let me answer the other part of the question, which is sort of just being a lawyer in uncertain times. For me, one of the turning points was just listening to judges. I'm not talking about listening to them from the bench. I'm talking about listening to what judges are saying to you when you're at a cocktail party and you're having a conversation with them as if they're actually human. Listen to what they're telling you, and what they are telling you is that they need help. They need help from the legislature. They need help from attorneys. There are partners in this. And when you talk about access to justice, everybody talks about lawyers and what lawyers can be doing. Judges want to be partners in this too. They didn't go to the judiciary for the money. They went to the judiciary to be public servants, and most of them, the vast majority of them, are doing a really good job, and they're really trying hard under the circumstances. But of all of these sort of entry points to justice, why would we not put our judges in the strongest possible position to succeed? I just don't understand that. I mean, why wouldn't we pay judges what they deserve? Again, it's crazy to me.
Is there something a lawyer could do in regards to that? Is just listening to them and just nodding stronger, or like,
right?
You're outlining a really interesting dynamic, which, because we're all focused in on lawyers as the practitioners, but these are sort of, you say they're the gatekeepers. How can the legal audience help with the gate?
A big part of it is keeping the good judges. I mean, for those jurisdictions that have elected judges, I hate to turn this into like get out and vote, but get out and vote for the good judges, and because these are not heavily, as you might imagine, the vast majority of these elections, it's not like there's millions of people voting
knocking down the door,
judge. Right? I mean, these things come down to several thousand votes. And if you want the right judges in play, then you need to get the judges on the bench that are going to be committed to these kinds of things. And when you talk to judges, ask them these questions. Ask them about things like caseload. Ask them about things like salary. Ask them about things like, do they have the support that they think they need to get their jobs done the right way? And again, this is a local government issue. And the amazing thing about local government is that it's not that hard to affect change. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for lawyers to get politically active on the judicial side. And it doesn't matter if you're a litigator or not. I don't think that this should be something that's just about litigators. I think that this is something that across the board, lawyers should care about. I think it's an important sort of seminal issue in the way that we practice. The biggest piece of advice that I give attorneys that I'm mentoring is you have to make yourself indispensable. You just have to make yourself indispensable to whomever it is with whom you're working. You have to be indispensable. You have to make sure that you are needed on these cases and you are needed on these matters. And what that often means is really digging into what could be a mundane, boring, challenging legal question and making it so that if you were not on the file, the wheels would come off. And if you can do that, then you are going to have job security. That's my personal advice to young lawyers, and they know what it is to engage. We all know what it is to engage meaningfully on cases and on matters. And when you do that, then it trickles down to the client. The client feels it. The client wants it, and then you become indispensable.
Nice, man.
Well, and that's interesting. I have a question that kind of piggybacks on what you just said. You were talking earlier about big law, being reluctant to change with regards to working from home and stuff like that. But I think a lot of what's going to happen now, big law used to be able to kind of dictate its terms, but everything has changed in the last month. And now, people are like, well, hey, I'm not comfortable leaving my house. We have to do this. I've seen it, what you're talking about with, notaries and e-signing and stuff like that. Like the legal consumer is going to affect that change. And I think that kind of leads into what you're saying. There's like, is that where, be responsive, be indispensable, and be willing to meet these people on their terms, where they're comfortable, what's easy for them?
Yes. I think that one of the opportunities that the legal profession now is facing is you are now being given the opportunity to be flexible, right? You are, for the first time, being provided a really good reason to innovate fast and in a meaningful way. So all this stuff that a lot of the younger lawyers in your law firm have been banging their heads about for a long time, now you've got an opportunity to really embrace this and innovate in a fairly low risk way. And the reason it's low risk is because everyone's doing it. You don't have a choice. So nobody can bitch to you when you're, when you've got an attorney that's on a conference call with a client and their 3-year-old toddles into the room in the middle of the Zoom call. Right? They've lost the ability to complain about that for the time being. So let's use this as the opportunity to experiment and to innovate and to actually, institute some real change into the profession, because I think that we can.
People want to learn more about, your inspiration and, following you in this world of legal reform and, change. How can they find you on the internet, Etan?
Sure. Our website is www.markmigdal.com, and my bio's there. And I don't know, we got kind of a cool website, and we've actually just put up a tab on our website for resources for parents who are like going nuts with their kids. Like there's some little fun activities that you can just like print out and give to your kids to do, like crafts projects and things. So it's kind of fun. So you can check that out. That's on our law firm website. My Twitter is at Law Realigned. And people can email me anytime, Etan@markmigdal.com, and I'm happy to chat. And I can't guarantee a Zoom video conference, but a telephone call, I'd be happy to do.
5 questions we ask everyone.
What was the last book you read?
The Culture Code.
Nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's a really good kind of survey of different cultures, and I like corporate cultures, because I'm right now in the process of trying to build up my firm's mission statement, and I'm looking for some inspiration.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, number 2. What is your favorite place?
Colorado.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, just the skiing in Colorado is that's my happy place.
Nice.
Right on.
Number 3. What sites, blogs, newsletters, or podcasts do you regularly check in with?
Hardcore History is probably my favorite podcast. Dan Carlin is awesome.
Yes.
And let's see. I used to say ESPN, but God, there's just no sports anymore. I don't know what I'm getting.
Right.
There's no more sports. I'm a big Michigan fan. I went to Michigan for undergrad, so I'm a big fan of Michigan blogs. And then for politics, I like Politico.
Nice. All right.
Dig it,
Number
man.
4. If you were stranded on a desert island and could only pick one condiment to take with you, what would it be?
Pickles don't count as a condiment, right? I just want to make sure, because arguably sliced pickles could be considered a condiment.
Yeah.
I would probably say sriracha.
Nice. I would say, I've had pickles on burgers and hot dogs.
Well, but if you're halfway to relish, let's just.
But I don't. But I'm not a sweet relish. I don't like the sweet.
With you.
I like the salty.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Agreed.
You get to stay on the island. All right.
Sorry. Pickles and sriracha. All right. Last one, number 5. After a long day or a long week at work, how do you relax and unwind?
I will probably pour myself some scotch, sit on the couch with my son at maybe, let's call it 5:30 on Friday, and watch him play Zelda for 20 minutes.
That's the cutoff. Nice.
I love it. I love it. It's like, if you can't find the ocarina by now, you're not going to find it. So
Right. It's like, what is this, 1997?
For show notes, links, and info, go to thelawsomepodcast.com or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. Be sure to leave us a review and rating in iTunes or wherever you find the you listen to. Until next week, stay lawsome.